I actually liked Passengers. I thought it was a good movie. Not a great movie, but I definitely enjoyed watching it. I'll be the first one to say that there are some big problems with the script here. It's not horrible, it's just very traditional and cliche. And to be honest, I don't mind traditional films. I don't think every single movie has to be like this deep commentary on some socio-political issue of our time. Sometimes it's nice to just sit down and watch a film and not have to dissect it completely. There are some minor problems with the structure. The story starts out very light-hearted and contained within the relationship between the two characters, but it takes a big turn towards the end. They kind of hint at this by showing us this screen of increasingly serious glitches on the ship, but it doesn't quite have the impact that it should. We spend most of the film with Chris Pratt and Jennifer Lawrence's characters Jim and Aurora, as well as the android Arthur. However, at one point another character appears seemingly out of nowhere and very conveniently in terms of furthering the plot. Not only does this character give Jim and Aurora the tools they need to save the ship, but he also dies from some BS reason. On a ship that's about to break down completely, they could have killed him off in an accident to make it a bit more believable. In retrospect, I think we can learn something important here. This is why we shouldn't insert mentor characters too late into a story. It just seems like the writer was trying to write himself out of a dead end. Also, they never really explained properly how or why Jim's hibernation pod could break down. Like, most of the film, they're saying that it's impossible for that to happen, and then they just explain it away with like, oh well, it happened anyway, it was an accident. This is one of many little things that didn't quite make sense, but I was still able to enjoy the film, I guess. The dialogue is super cheesy, and that's what annoyed me the most. It's so cliched, and talking about the spaceship as a sinking ship made me cringe. It's obvious that the writer was trying to make a space version of Titanic, which is a noble attempt in itself, but by drawing these parallels so shamelessly in his own dialogue, it kind of makes him look big-headed. Titanic is a masterpiece of a story, and by comparing his own writing to that of Cameron, he undermined his script. This is an elementary script that shows that the writer has a basic understanding of storytelling conventions, which is fine, we all start somewhere, but he still has a long way to go before he reaches Cameron's level. Another reference in the movie was the Sleeping Beauty one, and this one actually went completely over my head. Jim sees the girl sleeping, and then her name turns out to be Aurora, and she kind of looks a bit like the original Aurora as well. And there's a scene when they're having sex, and we see the northern lights in the background, and they're also called Aurora Borealis. All of this is very cheesy and a bit forced. However, I did like how they referenced the fairy tale. I think it works well with the ending and all. I think what disappointed a lot of people was that they were expecting a completely different film. The trailer sets it out to be some sort of action mystery in space, which is not. There is no mystery, there is no secret, there is a little bit of action, but only inserted as a last minute conflict needed to wrap up the story. This film is a romance in space. And I don't mind the idea of a space romance, I really like that part. But the way everything just suddenly goes to shit at the end is too sudden, and that's why I say the script sucks. Everything else about this movie is great. The acting is top notch. I honestly didn't think Chris Pratt could pull off being the anchor of an entire movie by himself, but just in spending the first 25 minutes with him proved me otherwise. It's not an Oscar-worthy performance, but he's really good here. You really feel with his character. Jennifer Lawrence is also pretty good, though she shows her true skill a good way into the movie when she gets in an argument with Chris's character. The special effects were really nice. There was never a point where I thought that looks fake or that doesn't look very real, and I'm usually on that right away. I also like the soundtrack quite a lot. Most people I know who've seen this film said that they didn't pay attention to it, but it really stood out to me, and it was nominated for Best Original Score. The world building and set design are great. I think the technology on the spaceship actually resembles that of the Alien franchise a bit, with the hibernation pods and the medical pods. When I first saw the trailer, I actually thought it was another Alien movie, or even the Prometheus sequel. Of course, it's not exactly the same, like the android is different and the computers are different, but you can definitely see where a lot of the inspiration came from. And you know, there's this bit where Jim tries to contact customer service back on Earth, and his message is going to take something like 17 years to arrive. How great is that? You'd think that kind of stuff would improve in the future, only to turn around and become even more bureaucratic. And the massive distances we're talking about here, it makes perfect sense that the message will take so much time to arrive. Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. The reason why everyone is so appalled by this movie. Basically, Jim's hibernation pod malfunctions and he wakes up on the spaceship and finds that there is still 90 years to go before arriving at their destination, which basically means that he will be dead by then. And so he tries everything in his power to go back into hibernation. Like, he reads all the instructions for the hibernation pods, he tries to break into the control room, he messages customer service, he talks to all the computers on the ship, and nothing works. So Jim spends over a year by himself just trying to figure out a way back into hibernation. He becomes increasingly lonely, and you can tell by the way he hugs a spacesuit which has the shape of like a human, and then he sees Aurora sleeping in her pods and agonizes over her for weeks. He becomes completely infatuated with her, and after some time he can't help himself, he wakes her up, basically condemning her to spend the rest of her life alone on the ship with him. And people are so mad about this. I get it, it's an awful thing to do to someone, but I honestly don't know why people got so offended. It's just a movie. And even the movie keeps saying that what Jim does is wrong. No one is trying to excuse him, except for himself. But even he knows that what he does isn't right. I don't know why people get so defensive about this. If they placed their righteousness on hold for a minute and actually looked at Jim's character, they would see that what he does isn't that far a reach. Put yourself in a situation where you're alone for an entire year. Maybe people are angry because deep down they know that they would have done the same thing and they don't want to admit that. I find this idea very interesting because yes, it's absolutely wrong, but I really feel with Jim. He's hugging a spacesuit. He's so fucking lonely and probably losing it a bit. It's obvious that Jim's love for Aurora is so much more than that. He tries to present it as romance in asking her out and proposing to her and all, but as viewers we can tell that he isn't just in love with her, he is obsessed with her. There's this scene where Jim looks at Aurora and says something like, "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen," and he has these crazy eyes. It's creepy, but also so real. Of course he'd latch on to someone like her to find a purpose after having been condemned to living out his life on the spaceship in isolation. That's why I like it, because it's so utterly believable. Thinking that the film romanticizes this act is misunderstanding the entire plot. Aurora is so repulsed by the truth that she completely breaks down and refuses to get near Jim anymore, a man who she previously was in love with. She even hunts him down in his sleep to beat him up. And while I'm in no way supporting physical abuse or violence, this shows us exactly how messed up she is as a result of Jim's actions. Now, a lot of people have complained about how Jim gets the chance to redeem himself by saving Aurora and the 5,000 other people on the ship. Obviously, none of the characters nor the audience knew that saving the ship would be a two-man job. So no, it doesn't excuse what Jim did. But see, here's the thing. I never got the feeling that anyone was trying to excuse him. No one is saying that what Jim did was right. It clearly wasn't. This whole saving the ship bit was just a coincidence, which I talked about earlier. And luckily, Jim has the chance to give Aurora back her life. At the end of the movie, they find a way to put one person back into hibernation, and she chooses to stay with Jim on the ship instead. Now you can say what you want about that, some people are claiming it's Stockholm Syndrome, but honestly, I think it's just a cheesy romance. Two people fall in love to the point that they're willing to die for each other. And seriously, this movie wasn't going to end any other way. I mean, Jim could have died leaving Aurora all by herself and she would have written her book or killed herself or something. Or Aurora would have gone back to hibernation and Jim would have been all by himself again and watch over the ship or something. And both of those endings are really fucking depressing. And it just doesn't fit with the story. But guys, this is a movie. It's not real. If Jim hadn't woken her up, there wouldn't have been a story to begin with. And he was so fucking lonely. Don't you get it? The point is that people need people. And you know what? They could have taken this idea further. They could have challenged it or made it into a film with a question of moral. They could have faced the conflict head on by taking out the entire bit where the ship breaks down and asked the audience instead, what would you have done? Or they could have given Jim the ultimate punishment, either death or solitude. But they didn't, and that's fine. Not every movie needs to have this incredibly deep and well thought out message. It's okay just to enjoy a film even though it's not perfect or even far from it. The writing has some major problems, but lack of effort is not one of them. This is a good movie. It looks great, it sounds great, and it features some great performances. This is a 7 out of 10 for me.